Thank you so much for being here with us today. Today we have another panel session sponsored by our Strategic Leadership and Governance Interest Group of the SMS and hosted by Aaron Hill and myself. My name is Daniel Jung. I'm at Southern Methodist University. I'm so happy and honored to be hosting this event, and I'm very confident that many friends and colleagues of ours will be getting a lot out of this wonderful session. So many PDWs out there, offer insights and advice and succeeding as a doctoral student or getting through tenure, but there are relatively much fewer workshops on navigating your career after getting tenure. While many people, from what I hear, want more platforms and events like this. So this panel is exactly about this subject, and our panelists today will offer insight into post-tenure career considerations, with particular emphasis on working towards full professor. So some of the topics we'll be talking about today include weighing administrative roles, editorial positions, as well as outreach opportunities, and more generally the evolution of faculty service post tenure. Okay, so one thing again, this session will be recorded and archived on the SMS SLG member circle. So I'll start out with introducing our panelists. We've assembled a wonderful group of panelists who will be offering insights from their unique experiences, for example, as department chair or dean of the business school or even president of the SMS. So in addition to being outstanding researchers, of course, they've assumed numerous leadership roles. So we're very confident that our fellow scholars are going to be preparing for, who are preparing for full professorship, will benefit a lot. So originally, Nandini Rajagopalan agreed to be on our panel, but unfortunately came down sick with laryngitis and couldn't be with us today. So we sincerely wish Nandini a speedy recovery. And again, we thank Myles and Javier for agreeing to join us on such short notice. So introducing our panelists with no particular order. First, we have Sharon Matusik, Edward J. Frey Dean of Business, and Stephen M. Ross, Professor of Business at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. Sharon has been in a number of leadership roles, including serving as the former Dean of the University of Colorado Boulder School. Next, we have Myles Shaver, Professor of Strategic Management and Entrepreneurship at the University of Minnesota's Carleton School of Management, where he holds the Curtis L. Carson Chair in Corporate Strategy. Myles is also a fellow and president-elect of the SMS. And finally, we have Javier Gimeno, Professor of Strategy at INSEAD in France, where he holds the Director B Chair in International Risk and Strategic Management and the Sauvage Family Endowed Chair for Academic Excellence and Dean of Faculty since 2021. Previously, Javier has served as Dean of Executive MBA programs at INSEAD and Chair of Strategy Department at INSEAD. So basically, these people don't actually need any introductions, but basically, I did anyway. And I'm not going to steal any more time, so I'll hand it over to Aaron now to lead the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to our panelists, particularly Myles and Javier, for pinch hitting at the last minute, so to speak, with Nandini's laryngitis. So thank you very much for making time. One thing that continues to amaze me as I go through my career is the givingness of people with SMS. So thank you. So I'll start right in. As some background, as Daniel said, we took a survey of SMS members, and two topics that they wanted between conference PDWs on were getting tenure and then mid-career issues / getting full. So that's the origin of this series, is really trying to respond to the SMS membership and provide this for mid-career scholars as some insight in things they can do. So with that in mind, we'll start out with Sharon. What insights do you have for scholars who are looking to chart the course, so to speak, in terms of taking steps to proactively arrive at a promotion packet that looks the way it should for promotion to full professor?
Yeah, thanks for starting off with me. And, I have to say, I'm thrilled to be able to share insights, both as, a faculty member, former board member of SMS, and then, serving as dean at a couple of institutions. And I would say, first and foremost, reflect on how great it is to be a tenured professor in the first place. I mean, it's a huge accomplishment, and it's a great it's a great privilege that we have the honor of having this kind of arrangement. And I would also say, as a complement to that, which feeds into preparing for full, is to, really take your research, teaching, and service seriously as you move forward in your career. I think sometimes people feel like, I've made it, I'm tenured, now I can just relax. But we are in a very privileged position to be able to continue to be intellectual leaders as we move forward in our career. I'd say a couple of things of pieces of context that I think are important that maybe not everyone realizes. One is the importance of relevance and impact more broadly, to you as a scholar, to our field of SMS, and also to your business schools. One of the things that we've seen happen over the last couple of years is a change to our accreditation standards through AACSB to have a strong focus on relevance and impact across your business schools. We've seen a lot of energy around RRBM, the Responsible Research in Business and Management movement. The Financial Times, I know a number of us have been in conversations with Andrew Jack, who's the education editor for Financial Times. They're really trying to think about how do you include measures related to impact in some of these rankings that are important. And then changing societal expectations. I can speak more from a US context, but there's a general feeling that scholars need to be contributing in terms of relevance to practice or social impact. So I use that as context to say that this is what your deans are thinking about. This is what the field is thinking about. And I think that's a real opportunity for people that are looking to move from associate to full professor, and that intellectual leadership is a really important part. So being mindful of what is your impact beyond the narrow academic audience is something that is really important. And one of the senior associate deans that I've worked with over the years would always tell junior faculty and those who are recently tenured, if you want to be a full, act like a full, and so that idea of being a leader, not only intellectually in your area, but also, being an active participant in things like developing programs and curriculum as part of that role of a senior faculty in your university. So maybe I'll pause there and let Myles and Javier jump in, and happy to add any additional comments.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I think Sharon, this is echoing what you said. So, I remember being back in grad school, and I'd run into these faculty members, and they'd lament about the wonder years of being a PhD student and how it was worse being a professor. And I think those people were on drugs. So my experience has been being an assistant professor was way better than being a PhD student. Being an associate professor is way better than being an assistant professor. And you know what? Being a full is way better than being an associate. So care about it because, with all of these things, there's additional responsibility and things like that. But it is also a reflection that you have made progress. You should internalize that. It's a way to celebrate the progress that you made. And it also, gets rid of crappy things you have to deal with and uncertainties resolved. So that's one of the things I'll say there. I think the other thing too, when it comes to promotion to full, and I reflect on this the most when I write letters for full, this is even more so than tenure. This is where institution-specific norms are really important. And so there'll be some, and so, the first thing, and that's always the case, is, what are the norms in your institution? So, I can talk about my institution at Minnesota because I helped rewrite our promotion and tenure standards. So, what we are looking for in promotion in full is somebody to add substantively, and that's purposely a little bit vaguely defined to their record pre-tenure. So that means what it doesn't mean is, don't say the same thing again and again. But we're not asking people to double the volume. We're asking people to, I think Sharon said, maybe spread out, maybe have bigger impact. When I write letters, I think one of the benefits of having tenure is we potentially take on a little bit more risk in what we're doing. So yeah, I'm looking, has your research grown? and grown could be in lots of different dimensions. And for me, when I'm evaluating people, yeah, I mean, yeah, have you published more? But I'm really looking more than that. Some of the exciting cases and the cases I can make, because I think it really is important to read the research, is, oh, wow, this person, you can see them continuing to grow as a scholar. And I think that that's a really important thing. So I'll just stop there and hand it over to Javier. But the 2 points are really, I think institution specific, and this is especially across these dimensions of service and teaching, are very particular now to full. So make sure you calibrate there. And the second one is, yeah, when I write letters, it's easier to write them when I see an evolution or growth in the research. And that does not just mean that you published more papers. I'll end it there.
Thanks, Myles. So I'm Sharon. So I will maybe add a couple of small points. So for me, I think the level of full is beyond individual performance, but being a force multiplier. So someone that are on the research, teaching, and service, not only is able to do great on those dimensions, but is able to help others. So I think on the area of research, it would be looking at the ability to mentor, the ability to develop co-authors, being influential, being not just contributing to an area, but being perceived the go-to person on that particular area in terms of evaluation. And sometimes that is indicated by maybe being in editorial positions and so on. I think on the teaching is beyond individual teaching to be able to maybe create new courses, transfer to more kind of complex educational experiences. So I did say that, I mean, this is certainly part of our expectation. And then in terms of the service, that maybe that either internally or externally, you show the ability to contribute to the school in that way. I mean, I completely agree with the point of Myles about the standards being institutionally specific, which means that you really want to discuss internally about when is the right time to go. I mean, I would say maybe we'll discuss this later on, but one of the most complex parts of my current role as Dean of Faculty is that according to our guidelines, I'm supposed to provide advice to people about when to go or not go up. And they can still make their decision, but you want to look at the risks, the type 1 and the type 2 risk, right? So one is that if you have someone who is recognized as a full professor somewhere else, and you are telling them, no, it's not yet, keep them more papers, you need more. At one point, they're going to say, well, is the school really valuing me? The other error, which sometimes happens, is the opposite, right? Where people go up and then gets turned down. And I think that is very, very painful, because that is, I would call that an own goal. I mean, these people have already tenure, and getting into a negative outcome it's very, very hard for people to really overcome that and remain in the same department. So I think getting that consultation and the proper advice about when is the right time, am I doing the things that the school value, is super, super important here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So as the three of you were talking, you highlighted some things that are like mentorship and thought leader, force multiplier. So some of these terms that imply taking some type of leadership role in the field, not only on research, but also on teaching and service. You highlighted a few of the normal benchmarks, editorial role, et cetera. Is there anything you think we overlooked there in terms of things that our tenured colleagues here, or even junior colleagues, could kind of think as these are things I should work towards to indicate that I'm a thought leader in those spaces? And I guess we'll start with Myles this time.
So Aaron, I think you've hit them, so let me say this, and I'm prompting, so Aaron was also, for everybody on the call, Aaron was kind enough to prompt us with some questions and some thoughts on that. one of the things that I'll say is I think that, this notion of leadership or intellectual leadership and mentoring plays a stronger role than, sort of a very focused theme of research once you move to full. And so the idea, I'm reflecting my own biases here, and again, with when I write letters, but, if you've been at this business for 7-10 years, and your research interests grow and evolve and point to different directions, I actually think that's a good thing, rather than continuing to focus. And, often people will set up with a research statement. I'll say this, when I write letters, and especially for full too, research statements really help guide me to understand how an individual views their research and its evolution. And so, if you've been doing one thing and now you're doing something completely different, and I look at it and I sort of squint and I go, I don't know how that fits together, but I've read research statements that make all the sense in the world to me. And then when I read the papers, I can see like a continuing theme or how they approach it. It's very easy for me to write a positive letter. So, I would say I'm one, and I know that not everybody believes this. I'm one who it's a good thing to embrace the evolution of your research, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I like actually seeing some of that in the promotion in full. I think there's nothing wrong with staying focused, but I think it's also potentially wrong to feel that you can have to continue to be so focused. I'll start with that and hand it off.
Either Sharon or Javier, do you have anything to add to that? I guess Javier, you unmuted, so we'll go to you.
Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to push back a little bit on Myles, because I do agree that very often what we see is a progression on a particular research stream, and maybe diversification, related diversification on topics. I think it is important that it's not just more papers, but maybe a different stream of research. So for me, that I would like to see that on the CV and so that clearly it's a different research identity or a different path. But I must say, I have rarely, but sometimes seen people who basically did their kind of tenure research. They kind of got sick and tired of it, and actually they reinvented themselves. And I must say, wow, bravo, because they felt that research was not getting them the impact and the personal satisfaction that they wanted, and then they restarted. And I think sometimes maybe just on the race of getting to full quickly, we might end up squeezing too much a particular existing research. And I think, while the timeline, for example, for promotion to tenure is fairly standard in the field, even the timeline for promotion to full is quite variable. So I don't think that you need to be rushed on that. Now, you also asked about what are the measures of leadership that typically would be looked for. So clearly, for example, one of the departments in our school specifically tell people that editorial positions will be heavily counted, and I think that's clearly, you see this quite commonly. I think on the teaching side, for example, one of the things that we do is look at people transitioning into new programs, particularly executive education, because from our business model part, our ability to grow is a function of the ability to move faculty from across different audiences, right? So from the more kind of large scale, but more junior MBA, executive education. So we want to see that they are able to teach effectively on that level, and also potentially direct programs in executive education. Now, another point about leadership is maybe some publications can be very helpful for claiming being full. So one of the things that I've seen among my colleagues is maybe going to review pieces that allow you to map the state of a field. So think of the annals type of pieces. So a piece like that can essentially credibly signal that you are someone that is able to chart the opportunities for research in a particular field. Now, I know that in some places, maybe, I mean, how annals are counted or not counted is kind of a bit complicated, but to me, it fits as what we would want a full professor to do, which is to have a command of a particular stream of literature, and then say, okay, these are the opportunities that other researchers should be following. So I'll pass the baton to Sharon.
Yeah, I mean, I would, my view is very complementary. I'd go back to the theme of impact, so, to some of the ideas that Myles talked about, that evolution of the research stream, I think that is important. And I think about what is the impact of that. So beyond just another paper with co-authors that does a small slice, it's about, what is that bigger impact? And that can look different ways depending on different kinds of people. But I think some of the mechanisms, are you sought out to speak at panels at SMS? Are you in editorial positions? Are people using your papers or your ideas in PhD seminars? Are you working with PhD students? All of those things. And then, what kind of citations do you have? Are you reaching a broader audience rather than just, people that are narrowly interested in the same topic? Those are all an important piece of being an intellectual leader. And then, back to the comments that were made earlier about knowing what's important at your institution. I do think that's important to understand. Many places, the criteria is more about overall excellence, not necessarily research as a separate category, teaching as a separate category, and service as a separate category. So I think that's important to understand also, because, if it's more of an overall assessment, that's where things like developing electives that complement the kinds of research that you're doing, that becomes part of that intellectual leadership piece, being, having pieces that are cited in, popular press, things like that, that's all part of that intellectual leadership. And again, it does vary a bit from institution to institution, but understanding that, helps to identify the best mechanisms to be able to show that kind of impact.
Wonderful. These are, I already have a page full of notes, so thank you. And for those in the audience, please, if you have questions, make sure you send them to Daniel, and we'll try and get those filtered in as well.
Can I add to something Sharon mentioned?
Absolutely,
so
please do.
We don't do this in our school, but I know other schools do it, which is the expectation that in order to make full, you want to develop an elective that is aligned to your research. Now, in order to do that, you need to have a program that is large enough to have all of these competitive offerings, but in a way that allows you to really kind of create the linkage between your intellectual kind of identity for research, but then being able to communicate to a classroom and eventually to practice. I wish that we had that.
Yeah,
and since we're talking about those things, so again, I think those are great, but there's lots of constraints at different institutions, and is that possible? Is it not? But some of the ways that we've thought about people beginning to show leadership in teaching, if that's not a possibility, is when you're an assistant professor, we're expecting you to do a good job and maybe develop some curriculum, and again, maybe not. But then this is also where I think, beginning to see someone take on the role of, you're the representative in the core from your department, or you're the representative on the undergraduate curriculum from your department. So you're beginning to play these roles where, but by now we expect that you do a good job in the classroom. Now we're expecting you, show us that you can do something more than that. And again, I think that there are these multiple ways to do it. And it would be great to do electives. That might not be a possibility, but showing leadership in these other ways are things that we value.
And I would just add to that, back to this issue of knowing what the process is at your institution. At many places, the promotion to full requires votes of people, a large group of people across different areas of expertise, so it might not just be your strategy colleagues, but it might be your finance colleagues, your marketing colleagues, et cetera. So to this point of, kind of being a leader within, there's leader in our profession, and then there's leader within your institution. Being able to develop your experiences so that people across the school, not just in your area, see you as a valuable contributor. And so, on the teaching side, it might mean developing an elective that's related to your research. It might mean, you can take a holistic view. And so when your faculty is looking at revising the core, you're part of that process in a way that is constructive, and you are looking across the school as opposed to just being an advocate for your narrow area. So again, understanding what that process looks like. Is it a school-wide process for promotion to full, and how does that, how can you shape your experiences so that your academic impact is visible beyond just your area?
Now, let me carry on that, Sharon, because I think that's a really good point. So, and now I'm thinking about, myself and evaluating within our institution. And if I see someone coming up for tenure and it's like, I don't really know them, but I know that they're doing good work, and I've looked at it, and they've done a good job teaching, that's fine. If I see somebody coming up for full, it's like, that person's on our faculty, I don't know who they are, they haven't done, that's a bad news. And so, yeah, along those lines, you want to be showing that you're, especially more in going to full, that you are a contributing member of the institution, and not this anonymous person that's been hiding in their office or something. I think that your colleagues across, and we're a place where the vote is across all the in-rank faculty. So that becomes a little bit of an issue. It's like everybody's going, who is this person?
And I would just, add an anecdote to that. I've been in meetings of, an executive committee or similar flavors of that, where there's a little bit of a joke of, this person is the world expert in the, the smallest subset of the smallest subset of the smallest subset. And, there's kind of, a little bit of a laugh about that. But, being able to demonstrate your leadership, to your field and to the school in a way that, goes beyond something that's really narrow.
That makes a lot of sense. We've kind of breezed into, from our outline that we had, into some of the composition of the full packet type questions. So we'll broadly gloss over that, but as people present this information, you all have touched on this in terms of different things that people should present. Is there anything about the full packet in particular with respect to that presentation of information that you think we should add? We've kind of hinted at ways to guide the statement and show that you're a contributor in the service and teaching. Is there anything else in particular you think would be helpful on the packet specifically? And I guess we'll start with Javier. I think you're first this time.
Yeah, so this already came up, but I think it is important to signal the delta from tenure, because I think the general expectations is that in addition to the overall package, you want to see, okay, how has your research, teaching, and service changed since you were promoted? I think I would probably put more emphasis on the role on development and mentoring of PhD students, for example. This is probably something that is not going to be expected or counted very much at the tenure faculty, so at the promotion to tenure, but I think for full, that is a strong indicator. Yeah, I think creation of kind of a new new courses or the alignment of your research with your teaching. So, for example, in INSEAD, we do a lot of case development. So these are the type of things that often people don't do so much at tenure because the pressure is more on research, and yes, the other things being good enough, but people typically don't invest as much on those. But at tenure, at full level, that you will see more investment on those areas.
I think Sharon.
And I guess the one thing that I would add beyond some of the themes we've already talked about is trajectory, so make sure in your statement, and in the materials that you present, you're showing that you're going to continue to be, even more impactful into the future. So being able to demonstrate that in some way through your materials, I think is one additional criteria beyond what we've talked about.
I have nothing substantive to add, but I do want to double down on something that Javier said, and that is, be clear about what has happened post-tenure or things like that, because I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in where people are debating, was this before or after? And you know what? That's sort of wasting time of talking about the substance of what you've done. So if they're debating that versus talking about how great the papers are, or things like that, you don't want them wasting their time there. So I hate giving really sort of specific things like that, because I think that isn't about substance, but do that. It just makes the process go better.
And then one thing that I would add is, if you do have gaps in your productivity for some reason, to the extent that you can address that in your materials, I think that's helpful when you have external letter writers who are trying to make an evaluation of your research productivity. And that's not uncommon, right? Coming out of COVID, we know that it affected lots of people very differently. Many institutions have extensions to tenure clocks, and, would expect, following that, there might be some longer time periods between tenure and promotion to full. But if you do have gaps in your productivity, to the extent that you can provide context about that, I think that makes it easier for especially external letter writers who might not have more detailed information to understand your record.
Yeah, I mean, to add to this, I would say that it is actually quite common, even independent of COVID, because most people are optimizing the pipeline to look really, really good when they go up for full, which means that they are going to be trading off finishing a paper that is an R&R rather than starting a new one. So very often the pipeline is probably going to be depleted, or more depleted than normal at the time of tenure. And that means that you expect maybe 1 or 2 years just to recover that pipeline before things start ticking again.
Yeah, no, along those lines also, I'll say this is, it's not unusual. So people who are maybe just promoted or just about to be promoted, one of the words of advice I give is don't take your foot off the gas research-wise. And there's lots of reasons why that happens beyond your control, right? So you're given a very heavy service. It's like, congratulations, you've got tenure. We've been waiting for you. And I dump something on you that completely derails things. That's reality, right? Or, you, like Javier said, you've been pushing the pipeline, you've been pushing really hard, and you take a breath. All of these are understandable, but you do have additional demands, and so to pick things up, and if that causes some people to potentially not see a lot of output for a period of time, as Sharon says, that's we know that's how the world works. It's seeing what you're doing and what you plan to be doing that helps me as an external letter writer write about that. But but these are the realities.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So one thing we somewhat glossed over in number 1, which was my fault as a moderator here, but we talked about taking mentorship positions, and one of those at times becomes different co-authoring rules. So how can scholars signal that they are a leader with respect to maybe sometimes they move down an authorship order, or they do something to maybe promote a junior colleague or a PhD student. Is that something that should be reflected, or how would you recommend people do that?
I'll start. I think there's so many indicators of intellectual leadership that I think the specifics of whether you're the lead author, it just looks different at full than it does, when you're going up for tenure. Because when you're going up for tenure, people want to know that you have your own intellectual identity. It's not just the work of your advisor. It's not just the work of the senior people who may be co-authors. So establishing your credibility as an independent scholar is critically important at tenure. The expectation when you get to full is that you are a broad, you're demonstrating more broad intellectual leadership. So, you should be working with PhD students, you should be serving in roles where you're mentoring other people. And so, the exact count of how many articles you're first author on, to me, at least, I don't see that as nearly as powerful as the broader context of how you're leading in terms of your area of expertise.
No, I completely agree with that, Sharon. I think, and I can think of actually a handful of cases off the top of my head. It's when I'm writing letters and I've sat down and actually read people's research, and it doesn't matter if they were first author or fourth author, you can see their influence in the paper and how it's just obvious. And those are the easy cases when you're writing. It's like, look, it's clear this person has this role. And so, Aaron, I think it's a really good question. And it's one in which I think I don't care about it so much, quite frankly, for the promotion ones, because the same thing, if you actually read the stuff, you can tend to tell, but it becomes much more apparent. And it's, I think, less important to game. It becomes much more apparent, and if people will read stuff of the role that people play.
So let me explore a trade-off on this, right? Which is clearly as on the way to full, you are supposed to be co-authoring with maybe more junior colleagues, maybe PhD students. But one of the issues is, are they glorified RAs, or are you giving them the space to be themselves, right? And a true mentor should be essentially empowering people to do that. At the same time, you don't necessarily want to be a co-author hanging on ideas that other people could have developed without you, right? So I would say it's a fine balance between knowing how you contribute to those co-author pieces, but not be too greedy and say, no, this has to be really so core to me that even if I'm the last author, people are going to say, okay, well, this is somebody's, because then I'm still in the limelight for my co-author, right? So how to manage the appropriate separation from your own identity, I think is important. And I think it's good to be generous in that.
That makes a ton of sense. So we're kind of bouncing around the questions in order. You've touched on a lot of them, so I'm trying to make sure I hit the highlights. So I apologize for that. But looking at some of the cases that you've had to make decisions on, what are some things that you would say make it clear that this is an easy case to write a supportive letter for, and the ones where maybe they're challenging, or you even maybe regret taking on the task because you either had to be a little more negative or less positive than you wanted to be? Are there some clear things you might alert scholars to of, hey, these are some things that really stand out, good or bad? I guess we'll start with, I think it might be Sharon's turn.
That's the hard one. I mean, I would say, a couple of things. I mean, on maybe two ends of a spectrum. One kind of gets back to some of what Myles raised in terms of don't take your foot off the gas with research. I think it can be easy to, kind of step back, catch your breath, and maybe look at more service, thinking that it's going to be a substitute for research. And, yes, you have to do service and you have to be an intellectual leader. And we've talked about that from an institution perspective as well as from a profession standpoint. but you have to keep the research going. You can't, I think the cases that are difficult is where someone is like they're a great organizational citizen, and they just haven't had the research that you can get behind and move forward. And those, are difficult because they're usually just great people to have in the organization. And, you wish they would have just pushed a little bit harder before they took on, some of those really heavy roles so that it was a bit easier. So those are the ones that, I find most challenging personally. I don't know if Myles and Javier have different experiences.
So let me, like Sharon said, this is a tough one. Thanks for taking that on. I'll agree with you. Let me start by saying this, and I say it to my students, and I'll say it to my junior faculty members. Your full professors are a bunch of lazy people. We want you to make this as brain dead as possible. So if you ask me, what do I want? I'm going to give you like the most brain dead case ever, which is probably impossible, which is not realistic. So, I mean, that's the reality. If you ask me what the bar is, I'm going to make, in some ways, I'm going to make it so high that, yeah, it's brain dead and that's hard. So then the reality becomes, okay, so what do we really want? And where are people going to push, and where are we going to see things? And I think this comes a little bit back to Sharon's thing, is it's important that we see you contributing across the range of what we expect as a professor. So if you have doubled down on one element, whether it be service or teaching or research, that's going to be a problem. And, boy, and again, not to say that that's going to be impossible, but you probably have to convince your colleagues that you are completely outstanding on an order of magnitude for that to work. I mean, because, what do I want as a full professor? I want somebody to shoulder the load with me and my other colleagues, and all of these things have to be done to be a great school. So, yeah, what are the hard cases? The hard cases, the obvious cases is there's nothing there. The hard cases is there's actually really exceptional effort, but just on one dimension. And that, for lots, I will just reflect my own judgment here. That's actually a hard case for me, because we don't want one-trick ponies as full professors.
So I agree with, of course, what Myles and Sharon said. And I would say the corollary of that is that as you move from assistant to associate to full, you need to keep more balls in the air. And the way to do that and still have a life is to look for synergy, right? So to make sure that either you have a stronger synergy between your research and your teaching, or your teaching and your service, or maybe research and service, or maybe editorial role, or running a center or something like that. Because, I mean, if you treat each of these dimensions as independent work streams, then there are going to be trade-offs, right, in terms of your time. So the way to get there is to identify ways that you can actually do multiple of those with the same effort. And I think there are ways, right? So we talked about the teaching research synergy. I mean, there are some service roles that are quite aligned to your research as well. Say if you are in a school where teaching and service is very important, maybe, I mean, as Myles mentioned, being involved in the curriculum review, maybe running some of the programs can actually give you both of those at the same time. And I think the difficult decisions or situations is where somebody basically gave up on one dimension completely to focus on the other one, and hoping that is going to be enough to subsidize the others. It doesn't work like that.
So along those lines, and this may be another challenging question, especially since I'm going off script here. So sorry. There's this trade-off between everyone wants experience, but the only way to get experience is to get it, right? So can't get hired without experience, but you don't get experience until you're hired. So do you have recommendations for the audience on how they may gain some of the experiences that you're speaking about? Is it as simple as just volunteering, raising your hand at SMS and some other service roles in the school, or are there other specific things people might look to do?
No, I think that, like you say, I think volunteering, we are looking for people, so that's one thing. I think, and this is maybe more to reflect on the last conversation. I think the thing that gets people in trouble is not necessarily not volunteering or that, but hiding from. If you give your colleagues the sense that you are hiding from some of these elements, whether it be the teaching or the service or that's where and again, I'm reflecting my own opinion, that's where I begin to wonder, well, what are you going to hide from when you're a full professor? Because the institution works best when, full professors, we're all pulling the loads on these different dimensions. And, are you going to be a good colleague? If you're showing me that you're not going to be a good colleague on the way to there, I'm pretty convinced what you're going to be like when, what makes me think you're going to turn that around when you're there.
And I will say, like your senior associate dean is going to assign you service, whether you like it or not. So to the extent that you can have those conversations proactively and say, hey, I'd really like to be involved in leading that center when the opportunity comes up. It's well aligned with my research. I have contacts and networks that can help elevate some of those offerings. To the extent that you can be proactive, that's going to help you get that alignment that Javier was alluding to. And to Myles's point, if you're hiding from service now, we all aspire to have institutions that have shared faculty governance, but if you don't have, if faculty don't step up to do the work, you can't have that. And I think that's, important to all of us. And, so for those who are in the leadership roles, they're looking for people who can help lead the school forward. So to the extent you can be proactive, I think that helps you tremendously just in terms of building those relationships, but also trying to forge this fit across the different kinds of activities that you're working on.
And I guess before Javier maybe adds any insights to that, if anyone has questions, please, as a reminder, send them in to Daniel or I so we can address your questions here in our last few minutes. So Javier, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I completely agree with what I said. Actually, I have a question. I will be curious to see what Myles and Sharon say,
Perfect.
which is about this process of when is the right time to go up for full. I mean, some schools have a particular time that is expected that after X number of years from being tenure, then you are supposed to go. Some schools, there is, this is a very flexible time. So whenever you decide that you are up to, then you go. And so how do you manage the process to avoid these type 1 and type 2 errors, right? That people become permanently associate, even though the rest of the world looks them as being full, in which case then you are potentially going to miss a faculty member, or the alternative, which is push somebody towards promotion that may not be ready and then may end up being scarred by the experience.
So I can talk about our process. If I think it's, so we have a long tenure clock, and it's not, and also the norms at our institution are, we put people up before it's a probationary period. So that's as long as you can run. I think across the school now, at least half of the cases come before people have run their clock. We think about it the same way in the promotion of full. this is one of the reasons why I encourage people not to take their foot off the gas. If they can continue to show the progress in research and they adopt these other leadership roles, it should be, we're looking for that to be sooner rather than later. You know, and so, yeah, it's not like looking at a volume of things. I think it's like looking at that there are accomplishments and you're showing a type of behavior that you are going to be a contributor as full.
And is somebody telling the colleague, is the area chair, is the dean of faculty, is somebody saying, well, okay, maybe it's the right time to go up? I mean, how is that done?
Yeah, no, so they're you know, so yes, it's not just self-driven. And then we also have in the last few years more university mandates of that there is some level of review and documented conversation with associates on what that path, where they are in that path.
And I've been in two different environments, one where it was up to the candidate whether they went up or not. You know, so you as a faculty member could decide you're ready for full, you know, with or without the support of your department chair and other senior folks. And then also a system where, you know, the executive committee or the equivalent has to make a call whether they will go out for external letters or not. You know, so they're already doing an initial assessment. So there's, you know, in both cases, there's not, you know, a definitive timeline. You know, there is a sense of like, you know, what is the agency in terms of driving that choice? You know, to me, you know, kind of back to some of the comments you made earlier, Javier, about, you know, people that go up and if it's not successful, you know, it's very hard to recover from that. You know, I prefer the system where, you know, the executive committee is making a preemptive assessment of the case about going up, or, and it's not to say that it's guaranteed, you know, if they go out for letters and it doesn't come back, you know, as you might like it. But I much prefer that kind of system rather than one where, you know, perhaps, you know, and I think this gets back to like unidimensional records is where you might see this the most. You know, the candidate feels like they're ready. The department chair says, you know, I think you should wait, your teaching has not been great these last couple of years, even though your research looks good, you know, and the person insists on going forward. You know, those outcomes tend not to be good in multiple, you know, like one in terms of the decision, but just in terms of how that person recovers. So there's not, you know, necessarily a fixed time frame, but, you know, that consultation in terms of when the right time is to go, and sooner is better than later, but you want to have, you know, enough of the record so you don't have the choice, the situation where someone goes up and then it's not successful.
Well, I promised you all three that we would stay within a 1 hour time frame. So we're almost there. Very thankful of your time. I know all three of you are busy. So with that, I guess we'll close with the last. Is there any thing that we haven't covered that you think, hey, this is something people might want to know? Because I assume we could talk for quite a while. At least I could certainly have other questions, but any last parting comments?
I'll just reiterate that, you know, it's the important next step is to get promoted to full. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking about it and caring about it, that's exactly what your senior colleagues want you doing.
So I would say that, so clearly it is important to be promoted and your colleagues want you to be promoted. At the end, this is just one step on the career, right? So I think once you are on the other side, it doesn't become so important. So I think you can use as a milestone on your development, as an opportunity to grow as a scholar. But really the objective should not be to become a full professor. The objective is the things that you do that allow you to be a full professor, which is become a broad contributor to your school, to the field, and that's really, it doesn't matter when it happens, but that's the real objective. And
I would say the same thing. I mean, what a privileged position to have tenure. use it, take it seriously. I mean, you have a tremendous impact on your students and on the world through the kind of research that you do. And so, once you're tenured, I hope everyone asks big questions and does impactful work. And, and all this will fall into place, in terms of staying, really engaged across multiple fronts and just taking advantage of the fact that, wow, what an amazing career we're in, and to have tenure at an institution that's going to support you in research and teaching and impact is pretty amazing. So I wouldn't lose sight of that as you look towards the next step.
Wonderful. So we are right on 60 minutes, 59 minutes. So thank you very much for making time. Hopefully we will pay it forward in the future. And also thank you for the attendees. And I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. So thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.